Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our SAES webinar on faculty feedback evaluation. We're so glad you're all here. My name is Mary Catherine Duffy. I'm the Director of Professional Development here at SAES, and I'm delighted to welcome my good friend Rob Devlin, our Executive Director, and David Parks, who is our presenter today. David is the upper school head at Holland Hall in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And he is a valued member of SAES and did a webinar last year on this kind of topic. And I want to give a little context because when we did this webinar last spring, I think it was last spring, we talked a little bit about from the perspective of this topic from the perspective of the head of school and how to be a good evaluator. And we talked at that time about the importance of seeing the other side of the coin and what does it mean to be evaluated. And so that's kind of what this webinar is going to be geared around, is the importance of feedback, the importance of why it's important to ask for feedback or receive an evaluation. I know that we've got some school heads on the call. I know that we've got some teachers, some division heads. And so we're just excited to have this conversation. And Rob, I think you probably want to say a little something before we turn it over to David.
Hey, no, just really glad to have everybody here. And I know this can be sometimes a sensitive or a scary topic, but if we can frame the conversation around the idea of professional growth, how can we all have opportunities to learn and grow and to get better. And so as long as we can keep that perspective, then I think it takes away some of the scariness of the idea of being evaluated. And so can't wait to hear what David says. We had a great conversation before the call, and he was filling me in on his work at Hopkins with independent school leadership. But I know that he's got some pretty impressive credentials with respect to the schools that he's served over the years. So David, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background, and then jump into the presentation.
Yeah, Rob, thank you. Hello to all my Texas people. I moved from Texas just last summer, June 1st. We pulled out of town, and then I started up here at Holland Hall July 1st. So although I'm not a Texan, because I'm born and raised in Colorado, and I will claim that always, I definitely spent years in Texas. I started my career at Parish Episcopal, so shout out to all you Dallas people. And then I went over to Fort Worth, and I was at All Saints Episcopal school for 9 years out there. I have a couple degrees in religious studies and in theology. And then, like Rob said, I finished up the independent school leadership program at Hopkins, which if you're interested in that, send me an email. We can talk about it. Rob, when you talk about some context to growth, I often locate that back in the confession, within the Episcopal tradition, that I think we're really open to recognizing where we are and where we can be, and by the grace of God, we get there. And so I think that so much of my understanding and my commitment to Episcopal schools really is borne out in how we pray and how we practice and how we give feedback. So I'm the new head of upper school here at Holland Hall. We're a pre-K3 through grade 12 school. In the upper school, we have 365 kids. Our enrollment is just under 1,100. So we're a big school, and we have a lot of processes that I think are strong, and we have some that we're improving on. I'll talk about some of those today. I left an evaluation meeting where I was giving and receiving feedback about 20 minutes before this was over. So I hope that this is relevant for you all. Let me kind of jump into this. Like Mary Catherine said, and forgive me if these are misspelled or if they're illegible. So here's the agenda. I want to just have a little bit of a reflection on some of the challenges that are innate to this progress or to this process. Mary Catherine touched on this, that we had a similar reflection back in the spring. And I think it's important to just have that for a minute. I want to spend probably the majority of time talking about a culture of feedback and how we can really locate this in our classrooms and use our classrooms as an example to then extrapolate the work we do in those spaces for feedback and then apply that kind of school-wide or system-wide. I don't know if you all follow Adam Grant. I find a lot of his work quite engaging. So I want to pull from him a little bit. There's a little video that I hope will work from PBS. Again, talking about feedback, but also talking about the psychology of feedback, talking about the impact that if you're an administrator that we have when we give feedback, and then if you're a teacher, the psychology that you experience, what you experience when someone is giving feedback to you. I want to talk about a couple of systems, some of the work that we're doing here at Holland All. I'm going to draw from independent school management on that. And then I think the bulk of this, my main takeaway, is that I want my own faculty, and I want to encourage you all to take ownership of the evaluation process, to take ownership of feedback. I'll share some hopes that I have for my faculty in the years to come. But I think my main hope today is that we leave being open to feedback, we leave being able to ask for feedback, and we leave being committed to taking ownership of that process and not having it come from the top, or not doing it because we have to, but really embodying that. So I want to begin with kind of this question, and I'm going to start with the part that's grayed out a little bit. In the spring, when we were doing this for administrators, we asked the question, what are some of the core challenges that administrators face when designing or implementing faculty growth and development systems? What are the challenges that admin face when they're working to give feedback? And let me kind of name one of them. One of the things that recurred in that conversation was, we as administrators do not have enough time to get into the classroom, to manage 40 or 50 people, and to provide meaningful feedback that is actionable, that is relevant, that impacts the faculty member positively. That's one of the recurring themes that existed in that moment. And so when we're talking about the challenge of feedback, we're not just talking about faculty, we're talking about administrators too. And I appreciate kind of the dual emphasis of empathy that has to kind of exist within that space. But I would love a little bit of a conversation here. What are some of the core challenges that teachers face when they are open to feedback, when they receive feedback, whether it be in a formal evaluation process, or whether it be in an informal conversation that just happens in a hallway? What are some of those core challenges that teachers face? I would love for us to take about 5 minutes and just either throw it in the chat, or more specifically, open up your mic and let's just talk for a second.
Anybody gutsy enough to open up their mic and just say it? If you aren't, that's okay, but we'd love to hear from you.
I think one of the biggest challenges has got to be the vulnerability as an educator that you feel in that moment when someone's, especially a supervisor who's coming and who's telling you, here's how you're doing, right? And so there's obviously some pride and some fear involved with that, but that vulnerability, I suspect, could be a challenge.
Yeah, I think also, Rob, kind of to piggyback on that, I think I noticed with my faculty that they were incredibly dedicated people to the work that they did, to their classroom, and they felt really personal about what they were doing, which I did too. I think we all do. If we're in the school, if we're in schools, we feel personal about it, right? And so it's a challenge to not receive feedback it's a personal assault on me, right? That's natural. But I think that seemed to be something that I ran into a lot with teachers, is that they were like, look, I put my heart and soul into this classroom, and now you're telling me it's not good. And that's not what I'm saying. But that's what you hear sometimes, right?
Yeah, I saw Mark McCullough had his mic unmuted for a second. Mark, did you have a thought on this?
Yeah, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Are you all able to hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sir. Yep.
Okay, yeah, I was just gonna say it's the balance of being open and honest, and understanding that the feedback is meant for your own personal growth rather than evaluatory. I mean, clearly there's going to be feedback that will be evaluatory, but it is establishing the very clear definitions of this feedback is for your own professional growth versus this feedback is recurring themes and it might be used for an evaluation. So it's that funny balance of how do we be honest as a teacher, honest and open, while still feeling comfortable, like Mary Catherine said, with our own personal feelings towards our profession.
Yeah.
That's great.
And I hope to address that a little bit when I show some of the work that we're doing here of separating our evaluation process from our growth process. So I hope that I can speak to that a little bit. Tony, were you going to say something too?
Yeah, I was going to say, and I don't know, I dropped for a couple of seconds, is the way teachers kind of feel like some of the feedback is coming from one particular event, or, you know, not the whole, we're not looking at them as a whole.
Yeah.
Hmm.
You just see a tiny experience or one moment.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's one of those challenges that administrators face too, is because time is limited, you only see certain snippets. And I remember when I was in the classroom, why did you come in for that 5 minutes? Right? Like, why didn't you come in for stay longer? Why did you come in when it was just not the best moment? Why is that the only thing that you saw? Yeah, thank you. Anything else? Any other challenges? Yeah, I want to maybe provide 2 anecdotes here. I said to my head of school, I said, I'm really open to feedback. Like, please give me feedback. And he said, I'm going to continually give you feedback on the 3 goals that you have identified that you're working toward this year. And what I appreciated about that was his desire for specificity. Now, I really think that he could list off a whole things that he thinks that I could do or do differently or do better. But he said, David, I'm going to give you feedback based on your 3 main goals that you have stated and that you continually come back to over time. Now, a side note here, we had a halftime basketball game where we played knockout, and someone, my ball went way off in the distance, and I ran to get it. And so somebody shot the ball and I threw the ball up and knocked that ball away. And he videoed it and he sent it to me and he said, we'll talk about this at your next evaluation. And it was great. But y'all, thank you for these. I appreciate the openness here. The vulnerability, yes, the personal aspect of this. And if we're doing feedback, if we're giving feedback to faculty in February and March, the way in which that is closely tied potentially to contracts, to salary, to what people care deeply about. There are innate challenges to this. But what again, going back to what my head of school said, what I appreciated about that and what I would like you all to consider is the ways in which your faculty, whether you're a faculty member or an administrator, have very specific goals that are grounded in the work that we do. I will tell you, before this year, I probably had organization as one of my goals for the last 15 years of my career. It was too broad. It was too general. When I looked around and had to submit a goal to my administrator, well, I can look at my desk and say, I need to be better at organization. And again, what I hope you leave today with are ways in which you take ownership of that and provide some specificity. So let me try to, again, provide a little context here. When we did this in the spring, we were talking with administrators, and we made the argument that evaluation and professional growth systems, that feedback, provides opportunities for schools to define culture and articulate and embody school values. I believe this to be true. We have the opportunity to participate in core practices that are innate to our institutions. And one of the ways in which we communicate these, and one of the ways in which we get collaboration on these, is by feedback. But I want to kind of change this here, that feedback systems, or feedback in general, provide opportunities for teachers. Now, I use this language very specifically, to collaborate with colleagues, right? To collaborate with their peers and grow in their professional practice. Specificity, in my opinion, in my experience, is really key at this point, at this moment. Organization as a goal is too broad. It's not grounded in the work that we do.
Mhm.
So again, I hope that we can come back to this, but I am a strong believer that feedback provides opportunities for teachers to collaborate with each other, to grow in their professional practice. So that's kind of a key question here. As we turn to just the question of feedback and creating a culture of feedback, I can imagine that some of you feel as if you are in a school where the culture of feedback is healthy. And I can also imagine that some of you feel as if you are in an environment where potentially the culture of feedback needs room to grow. So again, I would love to pause for a second. Have you seen someone contribute positively to a culture of feedback? How have you seen this work? What has been successful? How might we, as teachers and administrators, contribute to developing a culture that asks for, that thrives upon feedback? What do we think?
Well, David, I'm always a big fan of modeling the kind of culture that you're trying to build. And so, for the division heads on this call, the heads of school on this call, I think it can begin with you being open and willing to receive that feedback and being very transparent on the systems that are used for your own professional growth and feedback. So maybe through modeling.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think, I think to take that even further, the modeling looks like so if I'm creating a culture of feedback in my community as the leader, then when somebody walks into my office to give me my feedback, it's not the don't shoot the messenger, right? I'm showing them what it should look like. I think also that teachers can help create that, because what we're doing in the classroom all day long, and David and I talked about this before, all day long, teachers are giving feedback to students, correct? So that's what their job is I teach you, and then I hopefully get feedback to see if you're getting what I'm trying to teach you. And so I think if we can look at it from that perspective, if we can lead in that way, teachers can see it that way, then we're creating a culture of feedback for ourselves that we're already doing with our students, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you both. Anybody else? How might we contribute to developing a culture of feedback?
David, I'm also thinking in terms of Episcopal identity phrasing of this question is being able to show grace, right? And if every time a person gets feedback, they're getting knocked down a peg, or they're there's some consequence, or they're made to feel ashamed or something like that, then clearly there's no opportunity for growth in that. But if it's offered in a spirit of grace and encouragement, then perhaps that can help develop that culture of positive feedback that you want.
Yeah. Again, I love just our overarching framework of Episcopal schools.
Right. The baptismal covenant.
Yeah, it aligns so well with that. I've been quite interested in the language and the work around psychological safety. If that word is relatively new, I think a Google search will produce a lot of information for you. But how we curate an environment that is psychologically safe for people. I want my people to be taking risks, and that requires safety. I want them to be able to be honest with me, and that requires safety. So Rob, when you're talking about showing grace, today, the department chair came up to me and talked to me about a couple of things. And I said, this sounds silly. I said, thank you. I said, thank you for your feedback. And then Rob, I said, and I probably should have done it differently. Thank you for your feedback. Saying that someone's right, it goes a long way. But when we're in a meeting, whether it's a kindergarten planning meeting, or whether it's an 8th grade kind of discipline meeting, whatever these are, when someone says something, if we can just say thank you, right, that in my experience goes a long way. That person was right. I said, thank you for your feedback. I should have done it differently. So there are ways in which we contribute to these wider cultures of feedback.
And David, I would like to point out for the heads of school, certainly on this call, I don't think David is not talking about the snarky reply to a parent email when you say, thank you for your feedback.
No, sir.
Not that,
I
not that
think we've
anybody's
all
ever done
probably
that.
have done that to the parent who's had a less than helpful comment, and you reply on the email, thank you for your feedback. That's not what you're talking about.
That's right. Will Matsuzaki at All Saints was such a champion of having a genuine thank you when somebody would say something helpful. And maybe Rob, I'll help differentiate that with helpful.
And David, to that point, I mean, I don't think we're saying, I think we can say thank you for your feedback, even if in fact, we as a leader decide that's not the direction we're going to go, or we didn't really, I think thank you for your feedback is just thank you for your feedback.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily, I agree with what you're saying.
Mhm.
It could be, and it could be that, yeah, gosh, I didn't think of it that way. And now I see, and I should have done it differently. Or thank you for your feedback. I'll think about it.
Yeah.
And let's circle back at some point. It may be that I thought about it and it's still going to be that way or whatever, but the thank you can be there no matter what. And I think that's what we're saying is that's developing the culture we're looking for,
Mhm.
right?
And in so many ways, I think that this is a top-down practice.
Mhm.
What you were saying, it's also, I think, a bottom-up. I want people to feel empowered to contribute to a culture of feedback. I'm going to hopefully come back to this, but one thing I'm going to ask faculty to do next year is we have a few initiatives that we're working on. I'll point these to you here in a second. But next year, I'm going to want them to put on the door of the classroom when they're teaching something that they are really working on that's hard for them and they would like feedback. And to put it on the door with a little 3x5 note card and say, come on in, please. And so you drop in and you just write a little note, and then you put it in that little folder.
That's putting yourself out there.
It totally is. But if everybody does it, if everybody is able to work on specific things and say, I would love feedback, it's a culture. Now, I think in some ways that starts on my door right there.
Mhm.
And there's ways in which leaders do this, but then there's also ways in which people who make the school run do it too.
I have
Yeah.
a quick question.
I think that I can't talk about this. Yeah.
Lori, is it Lori?
Yes, it's Lori. I would just want to go back to what you were saying about how sometimes I think we're all guilty of it, responding with a thank you for your feedback, as you mentioned before, to a parent or whatnot. I think there's such a negative connotation now when someone says thank you for your feedback. How do we break away from that when we're trying to make a cultural change? And I know it would be by modeling your sincerity and whatnot, but you're still going to have, I think, a percentage of either your families or your faculty members that are going to maybe eye roll or whatnot. So do you have any suggestions on that?
Yeah, that's a good one.
I'm wondering if there's an opportunity. I think some of the stigma involved in that is just around the words, that exact phrase, thank you for your feedback. So if you can say thank you for your feedback, but use a different turn of phrase, and even change it to say, hey, I really appreciate the perspective that you've brought to this. It's given me a lot to think about. Then perhaps you're avoiding kind of the snarky piece of thank you for your feedback. That unfortunately is the first thing that my mind went to as well. So I don't know. What do you think about that, David?
Well, and Mark wrote down here, I appreciate your thoughts.
Yeah.
I go to, help me with the author's name. The gentleman who wrote The Advantage. It's a book that our head of school asked us to read. Somebody who has Google can look at that. Lencioni.
Pat Lencioni. Yeah, he's awesome.
So when he talks about, and I worry I'm going off topic a little bit, but when he talks about consensus versus being heard, we want people to voice multiple perspectives because they do inform in some ways, even if it's a negative or it's a positive statement, like they do inform. And it's not that we have to have consensus of belief about the decision, but especially on like administrative teams, I think we need to have consensus of support of the decision. So again, I feel like I'm kind of going off topic to that question, but there are ways in which when somebody voices a concern, like that's their experience, and to validate that experience and to listen and to say, I heard you. Another thing that I have a regular practice of doing is if I'm going to tell somebody I'm sorry, I prep them in advance and I say, your response here is not, that's okay, but your response is thank you. And I've had to do this with kids. I've had to do this with parents. I've had to do it with faculty. Whether it's a really hard time in someone's life, whether it is something that I'm experiencing deep empathy with them for, whether it's a parent that is just in crisis because of their kid, and I say, I'm sorry, I'm saying that, like, I've heard, I empathize with your experience, and your response is not, that's okay, because it's not, but your response is thank you for hearing. I appreciate some of the work that the institutional leaders are doing to really focus on empathy, to really focus on the person. And I think that we see this playing out in Episcopal schools all over.
Yeah, and that's back to your question about developing a culture of feedback, all of that is what we do when we develop a healthy culture of feedback, is that we find different ways to say, instead of thank you for your feedback, it's I appreciate your perspective. It's not one I've had. I've not thought, I didn't think of it that way. Let me think more about that. Or that's showing that culture of it's safe to give feedback. And then once if it's safe to give it, then it's safe to receive it.
Yeah. A quick recommendation. I like the NAIS book, Hopes and Fears, working with the independent school parents. I think that in some ways they provide guidance and ways to work with some of these parents, whether on the administrative level or even on the teacher level. They do a good job of talking about the 95% and the 5%. That 95% of our parents are so willing to partner with the school, and even when there's conflict, it is beneficial and it provides growth and opportunity. And then they also have their advanced toolkit for the 5%. You can Google it. There's some easy work on that too. The Amazon. Oh yeah, thanks for putting that in from Linchoni. I think that we see this also in our classes. So if we need a model for feedback, I would like for us to look at our classes. Holland Hall is the second year of partnering with Global Online Academy. If you are new to them, I would encourage you to check them out. Eric Hudson is a gentleman that I follow on Twitter, and I probably bookmark 95% of what I see from him. But I'll let this quote be up here. I'll let you all read it for a second, because I think that this is really kind of getting to the heart of the issue that we're speaking of.
That's good.
And so much of this is happening in schools, in classrooms nationwide. So many Episcopal schools are really deeply involved in this conversation of what does good feedback look like. And I think I saw some people of like the littles on this call. And I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. And when I go to the conferences, that is the best feedback. If you want to know what good feedback looks like, don't look at the upper school grade report. Go down to your primary school and see how they give feedback. Mm-hmm. See how it's actionable. See how it is so driven by knowledge of that kid. See where they know where the kid is and where the kid can be. So our school has been deeply involved in this. Again, I'll put these resources. Mary Catherine, I think we'll send this out with some.
We'll give this whole. You'll have all access to all of this.
Okay, because some of these are just super helpful. But if your school is then this is in this conversation, then that's great. If your school is not, you will be within the next several years. But we are seeing that the best way to work with a kid is to give them feedback that is actionable. Great job, right? That's not feedback. Good work, that's not feedback. But specificity, and I'll show you here in a second. The other thing with Global Mind Academy, and they're drawing here from Grant Wiggins. If you want to just Google Grant Wiggins 7 keys to effective feedback, just read that. Hang up the call, just read that. It really is nice work. They talk about feedback needing to be ongoing. Feedback needing to be goal-oriented. If your school does goals, that's great. I would assume that some of them just wrote down organization because their desk was a mess. The feedback needs to be tangible and transparent. Again, Wiggins does such a good job of elaborating on these. It needs to be user-friendly. I think that the feedback my daughters get and I get about my daughters is very user-friendly. If it's not actionable, this one's key. If it's not actionable,
It's not helpful.
it's not helpful, right? Now, as an administrator, when I get feedback, I ask sometimes for specificity, right? If someone says, David, you're doing a lousy job. What does that look like?
Specific.
You know, help me understand. And when I deal with parents, I want specificity because I want action. So the feedback needs to be actionable. It needs to be timely. We're gonna talk about this here in a second. When we give feedback, it should not happen
6 months.
only in February when we're thinking about contracts.
Right.
We've got to do better on that. It needs to embody all of these things, and then it needs to be consistent. Y'all, feedback that is positive is feedback. Please, we can't just think of this as feedback being negative. Hey, I saw you do this and I appreciate it. It's specific, it's actionable, it's user-friendly, it's ongoing, it's timely, it's consistent. One of the goals that we have at the school is this, and I saw you embody that today. If we're not in the practice of sending these emails or writing these letters to our kids or our faculty, I think we need to get into that process. So y'all, let's just stop, look at this, and then we can go home for today.
Yeah, I put that in the chat too. The key in the chat for you
Awesome.
guys.
Yeah, thank you. So again, I find a lot of insight from Adam Grant. I'll let y'all read this one.
And I also want you to notice if there's any similarities in haircut styles.
Oh man.
Yeah, you actually, yeah, I think so too. This is good, really good.
And if I can go back here, I'm gonna have to push a lot of buttons, but a grade 3 weeks after a test is no good. You know, something that comes, the sooner you get feedback, the sooner you can break bad habits. Again, I'm thinking of our students, but I'm also thinking of our faculty, and I'm also thinking about myself as an administrator. This work is so helpful. One more from Adam Grant.
Yeah, I love the part about suggest changes to make, because sometimes when we're receiving feedback, we're not quite sure how to solve the problem. I mean, how many times have I known there's an issue, but I'm not sure exactly how to resolve it. And this idea that you would give me feedback and then say, here's some thoughts around maybe how you could resolve that. That's a game changer.
Yeah, I'm going to give you all resources here just in a second about some specificity, and that is transformative for me. I think that so many teachers get into teaching because we love kids. And when feedback comes, it's so vague, it's so broad, it's not clear, it doesn't suggest changes to make, or if it does suggest changes, it comes from kind of a nearsighted perspective. I think that there are ways to go. So let's kind of, I'm going to skip this video, just kind of for the sake of time.
I'll find it and send it. I'll put it in the chat.
It's a little news hour 4-minute thing from Adam Grant. I'm a fan.
Now for another installment of our
Let's see if
weekly
I can-
series.
So here, a couple of things that Holland Hall is doing. We are trying to take some of the advice of independent school management. We're trying to separate our evaluation system from our growth and renewal system. This is in ISM's comprehensive faculty development. I'm sure you can find videos about this. And so what they argue here is that the evaluation system is, and I'm going to send an email about this later on tonight to some of the people that are working with us on this. It's about essential expectations. What are the 10 commandments of the school? What are the things that every person on that campus is expected to do? I'll show you what their examples are here in a second. And while I'm showing you, think of like the opportunities for consistent, for direct, for clear, for actionable feedback. And then they also suggest that when you separate evaluation from the growth and renewal, if you have a psychological safe environment, if you have a place where feedback can be part of the culture, then you want people to take risks, right? Then people feel free to try something new, hoping that they learn something, hoping that it positively affects students, but knowing that it might fail. But if they are safe, if they're able to do it, because it's not connected to their evaluation, it's not connected to their paycheck. So, for example, and I'm going to kind of push through some of these really quickly. The essential expectations are essentially required of all teachers. And All Saints had this; it was required of everybody, the head of school on down. And I'll kind of let y'all read these, but they have several here, and this is just an example. Do you see how these are specific?
Mhm.
Do you see how these are actionable? And 90% of the faculty should be able to check these off in a single point rubric. You're doing it. But if you're showing up late all the time, that's a quick one. It can be timely. It can be direct. It can be clear.
Mhm.
Comply with school policies. If someone's not doing something, it's easy. The feedback is already there because either you're doing it or you're not. Now, if your school chooses to create these like Holland Hall is, we need to make sure that they are visible and that they're actionable. We have to be able to see it. Okay. They also argue then that you develop a characteristics of professional excellence. Now, these are the goals. These are the things that you aspire towards. These are our faculty. We have, I think it's called the Pillars of Professional Excellence. And when we have jobs that we post online, we kind of tell people who we are, and then we say who you are, and we show them our characteristics of professional excellence. We show them not always who we are, but who we aspire to be. They're specific, they're actionable. Again, I think that they're deeply rooted in our Episcopal identity. Here is one of the examples that a quick little Google search found. You guys can see it on the right side over here.
Yeah, you know what I love about this isn't just a list of things that we expect of you as an employee.
Yeah.
It's building the culture that we were talking about in the beginning. It's culture building.
Yeah.
And this is who we are. And then you can refer back to who we are.
Right.
You know, I mean, and this is the culture that you've, bought into. Kind of almost like a family premise or a family. This is who we are as a family or a community.
Yeah. I think of that sometimes as when I hear people say, but we aren't like that. When I hear this in our nation, when I hear it in schools, like, but we're not like this. Sometimes, again, I kind of go back to the confession. Well, we kind of are,
Mm.
but we don't hope to be. We don't want to be. Like, this is what we aspire toward. And so that gap between where we are and where we hope to be, that's where that grace comes in that you're talking about, Rob. Like, that's where the grace of community, of Episcopal community, really comes in for me. So ISM has some good work on this. Again, hit me up on an email and I'll show you something. But again, what I wanted y'all to leave with is this idea that people can take ownership of the process. So let me kind of talk about a couple of things here. Of course, teachers have the hardest job, in my opinion, in the world. We're pulled in multiple directions. We have multiple initiatives that we're working on here at Holland Hall. Time is currency, right? Time is currency. We have to give time. We have to give opportunities for people to do this work. Some parts of education are static, but I would argue most are very, very dynamic. And so let me kind of show some of these. Another Google search of Charlotte Danielson, you'll see it in the links. Charlotte Danielson's framework for teaching. Now, I like that I'm bringing this up now because her framework for teaching is specific, and it was never, to the best of my knowledge, intended to be an evaluative tool. If you look at schools all across the country, they're using this as a means to evaluate teachers. Now, you can see how vast it is. There's 4 domains. Each domain has 4 or 5 kind of core categories in it, and I'll show you here in a second that they also have progressions. But look at this. She argues that every teacher has 4 main tasks: planning and preparation, classroom environment, instruction, and then professional responsibilities. A little bit bigger, a little bit more specificity. Again, teachers have one of the hardest jobs, in my opinion. But what I like about her work is she has levels of progression. And we can give these to faculty, not as a means of evaluation. Let me warn you on that. If you want to turn teachers off to feedback, give them this as an evaluative tool. But if you want to kind of turn them on to the idea of feedback, you can give this to them as a means of reflection. Where do you feel like you excel? And where do you feel like you want me to support your growth? Now, what I'm trying to do here is separate evaluation from growth. So be careful not to use this as an evaluative tool. But I can see me as an administrator saying to someone, hey, I see that you wrote down here knowledge of the learning process. You wrote down here that you're proficient. Tell me what you mean by that. Because I wonder if this can be an area of growth for you. And if we can agree upon it, if we can have kind of a coherent message leaving that room and a dedication to this, I think that we're better for it. Now, what I mean by this is this provides specificity for teachers. If I would have had this in front of me for the last 15 years, I never would have said organization was my goal. What I would have said, monitoring student behavior is something that I really struggle with, right? What I would have said is I feel like I respond well here, but I don't respond well here. And I need some specific help in growing in that area.
That's good.
And so the tools we give to faculty when we're doing our goals, like the ways in which we set them up for growth, not evaluation, is really key. Charlotte Danielson's framework for teaching, I have found it to be very, very helpful. These levels of performance are so tempting to be used as an evaluative growth, but please don't. Her book, by the way, has these for various jobs in a school, librarians, athletic directors, so on and so forth. Another thing that I would suggest is to align goals with schools' current initiatives. Jane Beckwith here, she's our director of teaching and learning. She calls this alphabet soup. We are deeply immersed in our second year of NeuroTeach, with the Center for Transformative Teaching and Learning at St. Andrew's Episcopal in DC. Great work, hard work. This sits on my desk all the time because we're deeply immersed in this work. And it's so vast, it's so overwhelming that specificity and very specific goals are key. We're also really starting our first steps toward becoming a school that lists our competencies and skills, not only just in the school, not just in the department, but every class, every assignment, every assessment is moving toward this work. Is it hard? Yes. But when teachers align themselves to where they feel like they're strong and where they feel like they have room to grow, specificity feedback can help move them along. And then finally, I think that we, like many other schools, are really deeply immersed in diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity. So much of that work, again, it's actionable. It's not just thinking, but it's something becoming very, very present. So if there's a way to get people's goals to be stated in a specific way that allow for effective feedback to happen, I think that Episcopal schools lead them the way for student-centered education, for faculty cultures that are honest and that are open, and that don't surprise somebody, and that don't leave anybody driving home that day saying, David said that I'm a bad teacher. Or they don't go home that day feeling like I'm a bad person. But they have opportunities, because right, we see that our students, when we give them feedback, we're not saying you're bad, we're saying you have room to grow. But I think that this changes culture. And in the same way, like if you want to see what this looks like, go to, we're working on our musical right now, go watch them on stage. If you want to see what this looks like, go out to, we're starting soccer right now, go out to the soccer pitch. Go watch field hockey, go to the basketball court, because their feedback mechanisms are different than they are in the classroom. So the way in which teachers take responsibility for this, it's less top down, and it's more me saying to my buddy, hey, I would like to grow in this. I would like to learn how to do this better. Can we kind of be partners here? Can we do this together that will move us along toward a particular end, to being the best that we can be for our students? So y'all, I want to try to finish up here and maybe have a little conversation. I have a 5 o'clock I need to jump to. But here's my contact. I'm going to share, other resources too, but that'll come a little bit later on. I think, and I firmly believe that we can create cultures of feedback that provide for psychological safety in our schools, that provide us to have opportunities to grow, develop, and to be who I think we're called to be for our children. Because in an Episcopal school where everyone is known and loved by God, and where human dignity sits at the forefront of it, that feedback and a healthy culture of feedback helps move us toward that goal.
Yeah, beautiful. David, thank you. Thank you so much. Questions for David? We want to be respectful of his time because he actually does have a full-time job. And we don't want him to get bad feedback because he was late to a meeting. David, thank you so much. Rob and I are going to stick on here. I'm going to finish up the recording and we're going to stick on here for questions. But David, I just want to say thank you again because you've done this twice for us. And I think you bring a lot to the table. And so sadly, this won't be your last webinar, I'm sure.
Oh, I love it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks a lot, David.
All right, I'll see you later.
Okay, we're going to stop the recording here. For those of you who are joining us on that, thank you for joining us. And we're going to stick around for questions.